last week we ran out of time. We're only allowed 10 minutes here to talk to you about the things that we need to talk to you about. Gold's been making around through the emails about all the things that people do in the Bible and they don't understand. And this last one, we ran out of time. I want to talk to you about it. It says, my uncle has a farm. He violates Leviticus 19:19 by planting two different crops in the same field, as does his wife by wearing garments made of two different kinds of thread, cotton and polyester in this day and age. He also tends to curse and blaspheme a lot. It's really necessary that we go to all the trouble of getting the whole town together to stone them. Leviticus 24:10-16, couldn't we just burn them to death at a private family affair like we do with people who sleep with their in-laws? You know, as I explained last week, there's a lot of misunderstanding in the Bible. You got to remember that that Bible was assimilated and selected by mortal man. And there were over 80 Gospels in the New Testament that they whittled down to just 4. So it had a lot of individuals that put together what we were going to learn. I've been looking on the internet about the Bible, and I was amazed that over 200 years ago, a famous philosopher by the name of Immanuel Kant had said that the ultimate reason people read the Bible is to become better men and women, to become better people. Well, that must be true today too, because further checking I found out that this year, well not this year, last year, 2010, they sold over 19,780,222 Bibles and distributed them to over 150 countries in 286 languages. That's a bestseller, any way you look at it. But the trouble is, it's an unread bestseller. Nobody really reads that Bible. Oh, it's like a cookbook, which incidentally, that's probably the second bestsellers. People buy cookbooks like they buy the Bible. They get 1 or 2 recipes out of it. Other people get 1 or 2 verses they want to use out of it. And that's the beginning and the end of it for them. They don't do anything else. So you take those cookbooks, for instance, they try a recipe out. If it works, they're happy as a lark. And if it don't work, so much for that cookbook. Well, everything works in the Bible if you just understood it. And that means you've got to remember. Now, I talked about Genesis, the 24th chapter in the 2nd verse, where Abraham asked his manservant to put his hand under his thigh. That's not what the original Bible said. No, remember, the word testament, testify, and testicles, they all come from the same source. You get the idea. Another thing that you might be interested in is when they talked about Mary Magdalene, the word that they interpreted as prostitute didn't mean prostitute. It was loose woman. Yeah, Mary Magdalene was a loose woman. That doesn't mean a slut. That doesn't mean a prostitute. That means a woman that's unattached. Even the Muslims today, they took most of their writing out of the Old Testament, subjugating women, making them inferior or second-class citizens, and making the woman beholden to the man. And a woman without a man was not complete. Kind of the way it is today, too, isn't it? But you see, the idea was that she was a loose woman. And that's what the word meant. You know, my grandparents were German, and they spoke German, read the German Bible, and the word "Dirn" in Germany meant maiden or handservant, but not today. That's the word they use for prostitutes. Kind of like here in America, we use the word hooker for a prostitute. Do you know where that came from? That came from the Civil War. Old General Hooker was a pretty smart general. He wanted to keep that ragtag group together. He wanted to make sure those boys would stay and fight, so he got all the loose women, pardon the expression, together to follow the camp. He gave them tidbits and special privileges, and they called them hookers' girls, hookers' women. And then that's where the word came from for hooker, for prostitute. See, that's the way it is with language. What something meant way back when may not be interpreted the way it means today. So my goal for you is to try to help give you an understanding of the Bible. Not just what the Bible says, because you're not going to take a fundamentalist who believes everything is literal right down the law. That means all these things that were in Leviticus, they'd probably believe it. Boy, a lot of people would be stoned today, and I don't mean with liquor, if they had to observe all those laws. But you see, what happens is that things change. Our language changes, for one thing. The meaning of something changes. Kind of interesting, that word hooker now also works for, let's call it intimacy, if you may. Hook up today. The guy will say, I want to hook up with somebody. Well, you know what that means. Get the idea? What's going to happen in another 50 years, let's say, what a word will mean? But you know, we're going to help you with one thing. We're going to go through this whole Bible over the next few months, and we're going to decipher what the real meanings of everything was and why. Now let's go back to this thing in Leviticus. That was perfect for those days. For instance, my uncle, that this person says that had 2 crops, we have now found out that one of the best things you can do for farming is to rotate those crops, not to keep planting the same thing the same way year in and year out, because our minerals and so forth need to be replaced and changed. And that's what we do. Of course, we do a lot of it with synthetic fertilizers, but it's better organically, and so is the Bible. Here's another thought. Out of all those people that got that Bible, how many do you think actually read the Bible? How many? Well, they have found out that maybe 15 out of every 100 will open the Bible up and take a look, like that cookbook for the recipe, get a little verse out of it. You know, my grandma, bless her heart, she used to read the Bible every day, and she had a technique, my old Grossmama they called her, that's the German for grandma, Grandma Dora. I can remember when I was a little bitty tyke watching her, she'd take a knitting needle or some kind of thing, open the Bible, and then just let that thing fall on it. And whatever verse it fell on, that was her verse for the day. And she kept it up, kept reading, and kept using that. Well, maybe it worked for her. There are people today that do that with fortune telling. They get a book on fortunes, the I Ching or something. They open it up and look at something. It's all automatic. Oh, you say there's still people that do that with the Bible? I do believe it. Well, if you're one of them, it might be a good idea to understand what that verse really means, and also what those words mean. You know, there was a group of Jewish scholars. They were very intelligent scholars, 750 years before the birth of the man they called Jesus. They counted and they put everything into scrolls. And when they discovered in 1947 the Dead Sea Scrolls, the longest of those scrolls was 25 feet long. They had to unroll it from the right, because when you read in Hebrew, they read from the right to the left, where we read from the left to the right. And they found out that the words that were counted in those days had been changed, even then. I mean, in our Bibles today. Well, let me tell you, there are almost 5,000 verses in those scrolls. There are 80,000 words and 500,000 letters. But in today's Bible, they're all missing about 200 of each. Yep, there's 200 less verses, there's 200 less words, and 200 less little letters. How can that be? How can they all just come down to 200? I'm going to tell you next week. God bless you.